We have watched her for years, a silent figure in the background of one of 90 Day Fiancé's most tumultuous sagas. She is Amit's wife, Sumit's sister-in-law. On camera, she is the picture of tradition, the embodiment of filial piety. We see her serving tea, her head respectfully covered, her eyes downcast. She is quiet, obedient, the perfect Indian daughter-in-law. She is everything Sahna ever wanted for her sons. The ideal wife, the mother of her precious grandchild. She is the living, breathing contrast to Jenny, the stick used to beat the American woman who dared to love her son. But our inside sources are now revealing a story that shatters this carefully constructed image. Because behind that silent, submissive smile is a story of torment, a narrative of daily psychological abuse that proves, once and for all, that the problem was never, ever Jenny. If you're ready to hear the truth that has been hidden from the cameras, the secret confession that changes everything we thought we knew about Sumit's family, then do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. You are not going to want to miss a single second of the exclusive report we have put together. The perfect wife is about to break her silence, and in doing so, she's exposing the perfect monster. Let's be honest with ourselves. For years, the narrative surrounding Sahna has been carefully managed, both by the show's producers and, to a certain extent, by a viewing public willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. We were told this was a cultural issue, a generational clash. Sahna's objections to Jenny were framed as the understandable concerns of a traditional mother. Jenny was too old, she couldn't provide grandchildren. She was from a different world, a world that didn't understand or respect the deep-seated traditions of their family and their society. Sahna's tears, her dramatic threats, her outright refusal to accept the marriage, all of it was presented as the painful, albeit extreme, reaction of a mother losing her son to a foreign influence she could not comprehend. We were encouraged to see her not as a villain, but as a victim of circumstance. A woman desperately trying to hold on to her family's honor in the face of what she perceived as a globalized disgrace. Many of us bought into it, at least partially. We could sympathize with the idea that a mother would want grandchildren. We could understand the shock of a 60-year-old American woman arriving on the doorstep for your 30-year-old son. The culture argument was powerful. It was a convenient explanation for behavior that otherwise seemed cruel and unrelenting. It allowed us to compartmentalize Sahna's actions. We could say, well, I don't agree with her, but I understand where she's coming from. It's a different culture. This explanation provided a buffer. It made her rage specific to Jenny. The problem we were led to believe was the incompatibility of Jenny Slatten with the Singh family's way of life. If Sumit had just married a nice young Indian girl, everything would have been fine. Sahna would have been the loving, doting mother-in-law she always dreamed of being. This was the story, and for a long time, the only evidence we had to the contrary was Jenny's own pain. But there was always another figure in this family portrait, a quiet woman who seemed to be the living proof of this theory. Amit's wife. We never even learned her name on the show. She was a supporting character, a set piece in the family drama. Her role was simple: to be the anti-Jenny. When Sahna railed against Jenny's age, we saw Amit's wife, young and fertile. When Sahna complained that Jenny didn't know how to cook Indian food, we saw Amit's wife in the kitchen, preparing meals. When Sahna wept over the shame Jenny brought upon them, we saw Amit's wife, the picture of respectability, the mother of Sahna's heir. She was the walking, talking embodiment of everything Sahna claimed to want. And her silent, obedient presence seemed to confirm the narrative. See? Sahna isn't a monster. She's a loving mother-in-law to the right kind of wife. The problem really is Jenny. This is the lie we were sold, and it is a lie that has now, according to our exclusive insider reports, completely crumbled. The whispers started months ago, trickling out from sources close to the family, people who have seen what the cameras do not. They spoke of a household filled with attention that had nothing to do with Jenny. They spoke of a second daughter-in-law, the perfect one, who was living in a state of constant anxiety. A young woman who had learned that her mother-in-law's approval was not a gift to be earned, but a weapon to be withheld. The story we are about to tell you is not one of cultural misunderstanding. It is a story of psychological warfare, of a domestic tyrant who demands not respect, but absolute, unquestioning submission. And the star witness, the one person who can burn the whole charade to the ground, is the very woman Sahna held up as her perfect example. The central piece of evidence, the smoking gun in this entire hidden saga, is an audio file, a secret recording. It was made, we are told, by Amit's wife during a moment of profound desperation. It was a phone call to her own mother, a tearful, whispered confession made late one night while she was hidden away in her bedroom, terrified of being overheard. She never intended for it to be a weapon. She recorded it, our source says, because she was starting to feel like she was going crazy. She needed to hear the words back, to prove to herself that the daily onslaught of criticism and control was real, that she wasn't just being too sensitive. This recording was for her own sanity. But now, its contents are a bombshell that recontextualizes every single scene we have ever watched of the Singh family. Imagine her, huddled in the dark, the phone pressed to her ear, the recording app on, her voice trembling and choked with tears. Her mother, hundreds of miles away, can only listen, her heart breaking as her daughter unravels the truth of her perfect life. "Mama," she begins, her voice barely a whisper, "I can't do this anymore. I can't be the person she wants me to be because that person doesn't exist. Nothing is ever good enough." And then she lays it all out, the daily grinding erosion of her self-worth. "It's every single day, Mama, every little thing. She comes into the kitchen while I'm cooking and she criticizes everything. The salt is too much, the dal is too watery, the rotis are not perfectly round. She told me yesterday that my mother must not have taught me how to run a proper kitchen. She said it in front of Amit, and he just stood there. He said nothing." The confession continues, painting a grim picture of life under Sahna's roof. "It's not just the cooking, it's the cleaning. She will follow me from room to room. She runs her finger along a surface she knows I just dusted and holds it up to my face to show me a single speck of dust. She asks me if I want her grandson, my son, to grow up in filth. She rearranges the furniture after I've tidied up, just to show me that her way is better, that I am incompetent." But the most devastating part of the confession, the part that connects her private hell to Jenny's public one, is about her child, her own son. "She tells me I'm a bad mother," she sobs into the phone. "She says I'm raising him wrong. If I comfort him when he cries, she says I'm making him weak, that I'm coddling him. She will literally take him from my arms and say, 'A son needs a strong hand, not this foolish sentimentality.' She criticizes how I dress him, how I feed him, how I hold him. She is trying to erase me as his mother and replace me with herself. She makes me feel like I am just a vessel that was used to produce her grandson, and now I am simply a servant who is failing at her duties." And then comes the line, the one sentence that proves everything, the threat that Sahna holds over her head like a guillotine, the one that has kept her silent and obedient for so long. Her voice cracks as she repeats her mother-in-law's chilling words. She says, "If I don't obey, if I don't do everything exactly as she says, I will end up disgraced and alone like that American." She uses Jenny as a threat against me every single day, Mama. Every single day. She'll say, "You think you are so special? You are replaceable. You see how we deal with women who do not respect this family. You see that American woman?" That is what happens when a wife thinks she has a voice. She brings shame and she is left with nothing. Jenny is not just a person to her. She is a story she tells me, a horror story to keep me in my place. Let that sink in. This entire time, we thought Amit's wife was the golden child. The truth, according to this recording, is that she is a prisoner in a gilded cage, and the bars of that cage are forged from Jenny's public humiliation. Sahna's tyranny is not about culture. It is not about age. It is about absolute, unyielding control. Jenny is not the cause of Sahna's rage. She is merely the most convenient and visible scapegoat. Sahna is an equal opportunity abuser. The only requirement for her victims is that they be women who have taken her sons. Jenny, with her age, her nationality, and her defiance, was an easy public target. She was the perfect foil, the one Sahna could openly attack and receive a degree of cultural sympathy for doing so. Amit's wife, on the other hand, was the private target. She had no visible flaws. She was young, Indian, and from a good family, so the abuse had to be different. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, a death by 1,000 cuts, all carried out behind the closed doors of the family home, away from the prying eyes of television cameras. This theory, this evidence, forces us to re-examine everything. Think back to every scene of Sahna weeping. Was she crying over the loss of her son? Or was she performing a well-honed act of manipulation, a tactic she uses to control everyone around her? Her threats of being disowned by society, of being shamed in her community, were those genuine fears? Or were they a form of emotional blackmail designed to isolate her sons and bend them to her will? She positioned herself as the victim, the matriarch whose heart was being broken. But this new information suggests a far more sinister reality. It suggests a puppet master, not a victim, a woman who uses tears and tradition as weapons to maintain her iron grip on her family. The dynamic she created is diabolical in its simplicity. She has two daughters-in-law. One is the public scapegoat, the other is the private hostage. Jenny, the public scapegoat, serves as a constant, living warning to the private hostage. Every insult Sahna hurls at Jenny in public is a message sent directly to Amit's wife in private. This could be you. This is what happens to women who defy me. This explains the sister-in-law's silence, her downcast eyes, her robotic obedience on camera. It wasn't contentment. It was terrifying. She was a woman walking on eggshells, desperately trying to avoid becoming the next Jenny. And what about the brothers? This new theory shines a harsh light on Amit's role in the family drama. We have often seen him as the more level-headed brother, the one who tries to mediate between Sumit and his parents. He seemed to be the voice of reason, but if this recording is real, then Amit has been, at best, a silent accomplice, and at worst, an active enabler of his wife's suffering. He has watched his mother belittle and torment the mother of his child, and he has said nothing. Why? Because he too is a victim of Sahna's control. He has been conditioned his entire life to believe that his mother's happiness is paramount, that her word is law. He is caught in the same web as his wife and his brother. To stand up to his mother would be to betray everything he has ever been taught. It would mean risking the same maternal wrath that has been so effectively weaponized against Sumit and Jenny. So he stays silent, and in his silence, he allows the abuse to continue. He chooses his mother's tyranny over his own wife's well-being. This creates a tragic parallel between the two brothers. Sumit chose to fight for his love, and in doing so, he faced public condemnation from his family. He endured years of torment, lies, and emotional blackmail, but he ultimately chose Jenny. Amit, on the other hand, chose the path of least resistance. He married the woman his parents approved of. He gave them the grandchild they demanded, and he has played the role of the dutiful son. On the surface, he has the peaceful life that Sumit has fought so hard for. But this recording reveals that Amit's peace is a sham. It is a peace bought at the price of his wife's happiness and his own integrity. While Sumit fought an external war against his mother, Amit has been presiding over a silent internal one within his own home. Both sons, in their own way, are trapped by the same matriarch. The theory of Sahna as a master manipulator reframes her most iconic moments on the show. Remember when she moved in with Sumit and Jenny, ostensibly to train Jenny to be a good Indian wife? We saw it as a bizarre, last-ditch effort to accept the situation. But with this new perspective, it looks entirely different. It was never about training Jenny. It was about establishing dominance. It was an invasion, a strategic move to infiltrate their home and continue her campaign of psychological control up close. Her criticisms of Jenny's cleaning and cooking were not about cultural standards. They were tests of submission. Every task she set was a power play. Could she make Jenny bend to her will? When Jenny pushed back, it wasn't a failure to assimilate. It was a refusal to be broken, something Sahna could not tolerate. And what about the family astrologer? For years, this has been one of the most baffling elements of the story. The astrologer's constant warnings, his convenient predictions that always seemed to align with Sahna's wishes. Was he really just interpreting the stars, or was he another pawn in Sahna's game? It's not a huge leap to theorize that Sahna was feeding him information, telling him what she wanted the outcome to be, and using his spiritual authority to give her own desires the weight of cosmic destiny. The stars say this marriage is not good. It's a much more powerful statement than, "I don't like this marriage." It removes her personal desires from the equation and replaces them with a preordained, unchangeable fate. It was a brilliant move, another layer of control designed to make Sumit feel helpless, as if he were fighting not just his mother, but the universe itself. This pattern of control, of using external validation, be it societal shame, cultural norms, or even astrology, to enforce her own will is the hallmark of a true manipulator. The problem was never Jenny's passport or her birth certificate. The problem is that Jenny has a spine. Jenny, for all her faults and her own moments of naivety, has a fundamental sense of self-worth that Sahna could not crush. She cried, she got frustrated, she even thought about leaving, but she never, ever fully submitted. She never became the silent, obedient servant Sahna demanded. And that, in Sahna's world, is the ultimate sin. Amit's wife, on the other hand, tried. She tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law. She followed the rules. She cooked, she cleaned, she was respectful, she produced a male heir, she did everything she was supposed to do. And her reward was not love and acceptance, but a life of constant soul-crushing criticism and the daily threat of being replaced, of being turned into the next disgraced American. Her story is in some ways even more tragic than Jenny's. Jenny at least knew who her enemy was. She was fighting a clear and present danger. Amit's wife was fighting a ghost. She was fighting the ghost of a perfect daughter-in-law that existed only in Sahna's mind, an impossible standard she could never meet. The secret recording is the key that unlocks this entire puzzle. It validates Jenny's years of struggle and pain. It proves she wasn't just being dramatic or culturally insensitive. She was accurately identifying the behavior of an abuser. But because she was the outsider, the other, her testimony was always suspect. It was easy to dismiss her complaints as the whining of an American woman who didn't want to adapt. But now we have corroboration, and it comes from the one person no one would ever suspect, the good wife. The insider. Her confession is a voice from behind enemy lines, and it tells us that the war we saw on television was only one front. There was another secret war being waged within the walls of the family home. This changes the entire legacy of their story on 90 Day Fiancé. It's no longer a simple story of boy meets older woman, mother disapproves. It transforms into a chilling psychological thriller about a family matriarch who rules through fear and manipulation, and the two women from different worlds who found themselves trapped in her web. One fought back loudly and publicly, the other suffered silently, her screams captured only on a secret audio file. So what happens when a secret like this comes out? What happens when the private hostage finally finds her voice? The existence of this recording is the beginning of a reckoning that has been years in the making. For so long, Sahna's power has been derived from her ability to divide and conquer. She pitted her sons against each other. She pitted her daughters-in-law against each other, using one as a model of perfection and the other as a cautionary tale. Her entire empire of control is built on this foundation of division. But this recording, this shared experience of abuse, is a potential bridge. It is the one thing that could finally unite the two women she worked so hard to keep apart. It is the one thing that could force her sons to finally see that the problem isn't their choice of wife. It's their mother. The story, as we have pieced it together from our sources, does not end with a tearful phone call. That call was the catalyst. It was the moment the dam of fear and silence began to crack. For weeks after that call, we are told, Amit's wife replayed the recording for herself. She listened to her own trembling voice, and with each listen, a little bit of fear was replaced by a little bit of anger. She was angry at Sahna for the abuse, she was angry at Amit for his complicity, and she was angry at herself for enduring it for so long. She realized that her son was now watching this dynamic. He was learning how a man should treat a woman from his father. He was learning how a grandmother should treat a mother from Sahna. And she knew she could not let him grow up in a house where his mother was treated like a servant, where her spirit was being systematically broken day by day. The final straw, the moment that pushed her from silent suffering to open rebellion, was an incident involving her son. Sahna had, as she often did, criticized the way Amit's wife was feeding the child. She claimed the food wasn't traditional enough, that it was Western nonsense. She tried to take the bowl from her hands to feed him herself. And at that moment, something inside Amit's wife snapped. All the years of silent resentment, all the swallowed insults, all the fear, boiled over into a single clarifying moment of protective maternal rage. She pulled the bowl back. She looked her mother-in-law directly in the eye, for the first time without fear, and she spoke. What she said next would ignite the fire that would either save the family or burn it to the ground. This was the beginning of the reckoning, the moment the perfect wife decided she would rather be a disgraced woman than a perfect slave. The confrontation that would follow would force Amit to make a choice he had been avoiding his entire life, and it would set the stage for a showdown that would unite both brothers against their mother for the very first time. The perfect monster was about to meet her match, and it wasn't the American woman she despised, but the Indian daughter-in-law she thought she owned. The confrontation didn't happen in a fit of screaming. It was colder than that. It was the chilling calm of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Later that day, after the incident with the child's food, Amit's wife waited for Amit to come home from work. She sat him down, and for the first time, she did not hedge or soften her words. She told him everything. She detailed the daily criticisms, the constant surveillance, the chipping away at her identity as a wife and a mother. And when he started to offer the usual excuses, "That's just how mom is. She means well. You have to understand the culture." She held up her hand to stop him. And then she played the recording. We are told that Amit sat there in stunned silence, listening to his wife's whispered, sobbing confession to her own mother. He was hearing the raw, unfiltered truth of her existence in his home for the very first time. He was hearing the pain he had chosen to ignore. He heard his own mother's words, twisted and cruel, being repeated by his wife. And most importantly, he heard the Jenny threat. He heard how his mother was using his brother's wife, a woman he knew his brother loved, as a boogeyman to terrorize his own wife. The compartmentalization he had maintained for years, the idea that the Jenny problem was separate from his own peaceful life, shattered at that moment. He realized it was all one story, one campaign of control orchestrated by one woman. That night, a different kind of man walked into Sahna's part of the house. Amit, for the first time, was not the dutiful, mediating son. He was a husband and a father, and he was there to defend his family. The confrontation that followed was, according to our sources, a seismic event in the Singh family history. Amit's wife stood beside him, no longer silent. When Sahna began her usual tirade, this time aimed at both of them for daring to present a united front, Amit's wife spoke. "I will not be your slave," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I will not let you use Jenny's name to threaten me anymore." Sahna, we are told, was shocked into a moment of silence. This was not the daughter-in-law she knew. This was not the quiet, obedient girl she had so carefully molded through fear. When she recovered, she unleashed her full arsenal. The tears, the accusations of disrespect, the dramatic chest-clutching about how her own children were trying to kill her. She turned to Amit, expecting him to buckle, to apologize, to force his wife back into line as he always had. But Amit didn't buckle. He stood his ground. He told his mother that the way she had been treating his wife was unacceptable, and that it would stop. This is when Sahna played her trump card, the one she had used against Sumit for years, the threat of disownment. She told Amit that if he chose his wife over his mother, he would be shaming the family, that he would be as good as dead to her. It was the ultimate emotional blackmail. But then Amit's wife did something Sahna never, in a million years, anticipated. She looked at her mother-in-law and said, "Fine. Then he can come with me. I am taking my son, and I am going back to my parents' house. Amit can decide if he wants to be your son or if he wants to be a husband and a father. But I will not raise my child in this house." And with that, she walked out of the room to pack. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real. It was happening. Sahna's carefully constructed world, a world where she held all the power, was collapsing around her. She had pushed the perfect wife too far, and in doing so, she had inadvertently given her the one thing she never wanted her to have, the courage to leave. The showdown had reached its climax, forcing Amit to finally, irrevocably choose between his mother's tyranny and his own family's survival. And his choice would send shockwaves that would reach all the way to Sumit and Jenny, potentially changing the entire landscape of the Singh family forever. The reckoning had arrived. The question that remained was, who would be left standing in the rubble? Amit did not move. He was frozen in the hallway, a statue in the crossfire between two worlds. From the living room, he could hear his mother's voice, a rising tide of fury and disbelief. Her script was the same one he had heard his entire life, the one she deployed against Sumit for a decade. Accusations of betrayal, pronouncements of heartbreak, lamentations of a son's disrespect. It was a symphony of manipulation, and for the first time, he heard it not as a son, but as a husband. From the bedroom, he heard a different sound, the quiet, deliberate sound of drawers opening and closing. The soft rustle of clothes being folded. It was the sound of a future he was about to lose. It was the sound of his wife's liberation and his own damnation. For years, he had told himself that his path was the correct one. He was the good son. He had preserved the peace. He had maintained the family's honor. He had a wife, a child, a home, all without the drama and chaos that Sumit had invited into his life. He had pitied his brother, even as he secretly judged him. He saw Sumit's struggle as a self-inflicted wound, a needless rebellion against a system that was designed for their happiness. But in the silence between his mother's shrieks and his wife's packing, the truth finally crystallized in his mind, sharp and painful. He had not preserved the peace. He had merely enforced a ceasefire in his own home at the cost of his wife's soul. The peace was a lie. His family's honor was a lie. It was a carefully constructed facade built upon the silent suffering of a good woman. Sumit wasn't the foolish brother. He was the brave one. Sumit had fought a war out in the open. Amit had been a willing warden in a secret prison. He saw his son's face in his mind. What would that boy learn in this house? He would learn that a woman's voice should be small. He would learn that a wife's purpose is to serve and endure. He would learn that a man's loyalty is to his mother first and his own family second. He would learn the very lessons that had led Amit to this moment of pathetic paralysis. The cycle would continue. His son would grow up to be him. And Amit knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he would rather die than let that happen. He turned his back on his mother's voice and for the first time in his life walked toward his wife. When he entered the bedroom, she didn't look at him. Her movements were fluid, detached. She was a woman on a mission, her grief already hardening into resolve. He stood in the doorway, a stranger in his own life. "Don't go," he said, his voice sounding weak, unfamiliar. She finally stopped, a small dress for their son in her hands. She looked at him, and her eyes were not filled with tears, but with a profound and weary disappointment. "Where were you, Amit?" she asked, her voice devoid of accusation, which was somehow worse. "Where were you for the last 3 years, when I was in the kitchen, when I was in the nursery, when I was crying in the bathroom? You were there, but you were not there. You were a ghost in our marriage, and I cannot live with a ghost anymore. Our son will not be raised by a ghost." He crossed the room and gently took her hands. They were cold. "I was a coward," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I was a coward. I saw it. I heard it. And I told myself it was normal. I told myself it was the price of peace. I was wrong. Let me fix it. Please, don't go. Let us fix it together." She searched his eyes, looking for the man she had married, the man who had been buried under the weight of filial duty. What she saw there for the first time was a spark of the fighter she had seen in his brother. "How?" she asked, a single word that held the weight of 1,000 broken promises. "How is this time different?" He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, but his purpose was firm. He found Sumit's number and pressed the call. He knew this was the ultimate betrayal in his mother's eyes, to conspire with the prodigal son. But he was no longer his mother's son, not in the way he had been. He was his wife's husband. He was his child's father. The phone rang once, twice. Then Sumit's voice, cautious. "Hello?" "Sumit," Amit began, his voice cracking with the weight of years of unspoken truth. "It's me. I need your help. You were right. About everything. About her. You were right." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Amit could picture his brother processing the words he had probably given up on ever hearing. When Sumit finally spoke, there was no trace of triumph in his voice, only a deep, resonant sadness. "What has she done?" Amit explained everything. The years of quiet torment his wife had endured, the daily criticisms, the psychological games, and finally the threat, the use of Jenny as a weapon. "She told Sumit, she told my wife that if she didn't obey, she would end up disgraced like that American. She uses your wife's pain to control mine. It's all a game to her. We are all just pieces on her board." He then told Sumit that his wife was packing, that she was leaving him. "I'm going to lose my family, Sumit, because I was too weak to stand up to her, because I was afraid of becoming you." "Don't be afraid of becoming me, Amit." Sumit's voice was firm, the voice of a battle-hardened veteran. "Be afraid of becoming our father, a man who watches and does nothing. You are not him. Not tonight. Tell me what you need." "I need you here," Amit said. "I need you and Jenny. Mom can fight one of us. She's been doing it for years. I don't know if she can fight both of us. Not when we stand together." "Don't move," Sumit said. "We are on our way." The arrival of Sumit and Jenny was a moment of surreal theater. Sahna, who was still holding court in the living room, railing against her daughter-in-law's insolence to a bewildered Anil, was rendered speechless when her estranged son and his American wife walked through the front door. The look on her face was a mixture of shock and incandescent fury. This was a breach of protocol, a violation of her carefully segregated battlefronts. She was fighting a war in the East, and suddenly the Western Front appeared in her living room. But the most significant moment happened not in the living room, but in the hallway. Jenny, her face etched with a familiar anxiety, saw Amit's wife standing in the doorway of her bedroom, her son in her arms. The two women, who had been positioned as polar opposites for years, the perfect wife and the failed wife, looked at each other. There was no animosity, there was no rivalry, there was only a shared silent understanding. Jenny saw in the younger woman's eyes the same trapped, hunted look she had seen in her own mirror 1,000 times. And Amit's wife saw in Jenny not a cautionary tale, but a survivor, a woman who had endured the storm and was still standing. In that silent gaze, Sahna's greatest weapon, the division between these two women, was disarmed forever. Amit's wife gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a concession, an apology, and an alliance. The four of them, Sumit and Jenny, Amit and his wife, walked into the living room together. They didn't sit. They stood, a united front, a wall of defiance that Sahna had never faced before. Anil, the father, simply faded into the background, a ghost at his own execution. "Mom," Sumit began, his voice calm and measured. "We are not here to fight. We are here to end the fighting." Sahna scoffed, her recovery beginning. "You bring this woman into this house after all the shame she has caused, and you talk of ending fights? You are the one who starts them." "No, Mom," Amit said, stepping forward. And this was the blow Sahna was not prepared for. Sumit's defiance was old news. Amit's was a new and terrifying betrayal. "The fight ends because the game is over. We know what you have been doing." He looked at his wife, who stood holding their child, her chin held high. "You have been tormenting my wife. You have been using Jenny as a threat to keep her in line. You have been trying to control my family, my marriage, my son, and it is over." "Lies!" Sahna shrieked, clutching her heart in a gesture so practiced it had lost all meaning. "She is lying to you. She is turning you against your own mother. This is what these women do. They come into a family and they poison it." "Is it a lie, Mom?" Amit asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "My wife recorded you. She recorded the things you said. She recorded the threats. Would you like to hear it? Would you like Anil to hear it? Would you like our neighbors to hear what the perfect traditional Sahna says to her daughter-in-law when she thinks no one is listening?" Checkmate. The color drained from Sahna's face. The mention of a recording, of tangible proof, was something her emotional theatrics could not overcome. For the first time, she was truly cornered. Her power had always been in the plausible deniability of her actions, in the he said, she said nature of domestic disputes. But a recording? That was a different kind of weapon. That was evidence. Sumit stepped forward again. "This is not about disrespect, Mom. This is about boundaries. From now on, you are welcome in our lives as a mother and a grandmother, but you are not the ruler of this family anymore. You will not criticize our wives. You will not interfere in our marriages. You will not try to raise our children. You will treat these two women, my wife and my brother's wife, with respect. If you can do that, we can be a family. If you cannot, then you will be a mother with two sons who you never see. The choice is yours, but the old way is over. Tonight." Each word was a nail in the coffin of her reign. She looked from Sumit's determined face to Amit's newly hardened one. She looked at Jenny, who was no longer flinching but standing tall beside her husband. And she looked at her other daughter-in-law, the one she thought she owned, who was now staring back at her without a trace of fear. She saw the alliance. She saw the end of her power. Her empire of guilt and fear had crumbled in a single evening. Her reaction was not explosive. It was an implosion. She seemed to shrink in on herself, the rage and fire in her eyes replaced by a cold, desolate emptiness. She had no more moves to make. She had threatened disownment, and they had accepted it. She had cried, and they had not comforted her. She had screamed, and they had not backed down. Stripped of all her weapons, she was just an old woman who had pushed her children so far that they had finally pushed back together. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked slowly to her room, closing the door behind her. The silence she left in her wake was not the tense, anxious silence of the past. It was a new silence, a quiet filled with possibility. It was the sound of freedom. In the aftermath, the two couples stood together in the living room. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, exhausted sense of relief. Amit's wife walked over to Jenny and for the first time spoke to her directly. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Jenny asked, surprised. "For being strong," she replied. "For showing me it was possible to stand up. I am sorry for everything." Jenny just shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "Don't be sorry. We're on the same side. We always were. We just didn't know it." The two brothers, Amit and Sumit, looked at each other. Years of distance, of resentment, of misunderstanding melted away. They were not the good son and the bad son anymore. They were just brothers, united in the shared, complicated love for their family and the joint decision to save it from its matriarch. They had chosen their wives. They had chosen their own families. And in doing so, they had finally found their way back to each other. The future was uncertain, the wounds were deep and would take time to heal. But for the first time in a decade, the house was not divided. Sahna's tyranny had inadvertently forged an unbreakable bond between the very people she had tried so desperately to tear apart. The perfect wife just exposed the perfect monster. Is Sahna the biggest villain in 90-day history? Her behavior goes far beyond cultural concerns or a mother's love. It demonstrates a textbook pattern of narcissistic control, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Let's discuss her behavior in the comments. Was this a cultural clash, or was it a calculated campaign of tyranny by a domestic dictator? Share this if you stand with the daughters-in-law.